February 9th, 2025, approximately 600 protesters assembled in the Little Village neighborhood of Chicago, also known as the Mexico of the Midwest for its unapologetic Hispanic culture hanging from the storefronts and alley murals. I saw many familiar organizations from the 2024 Democratic National Convention 6 months ago, such as the FRSO, USPCN, and UIC-SDS. If you don't know those acronyms, that's okay. All you need to know is that if you go to these protests, you're going to see a lot of acronyms. Temperatures were in the 30s, and light, misty rain began to descend as speeches started. One of the speakers was Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez of the 25th Ward.
To me, as an immigrant, as a father, and as resident of the 25th Ward, I am proud to stand here with you today, as many people in our community are afraid, terrorized. Not too far from here, only a few blocks away, one of our neighbors was grabbed by ICE. The media, the corporate media, the billionaires are referring to our migrant community and our immigrants as criminals. But let me tell you that who they grabbed was a father, who they grabbed was a longtime resident of Little Village, who has a baby on its way, who has 2 kids also. Shame. It's a shame on them. Shame. And here in our neighborhood, we got each other's back. And that's a call for every single one of you to make sure that you have your neighbors back. That when they're here, when the cowards are here, that we're out there. That family was not alone. That's a father with a baby. That's no criminal. And I tell you that the community responded. And these cowards did not stop it in his home, did not come and knock the door, because they know that we are well informed. They complain about actually how well informed we are. Right. But these cowards waited for him to leave his home. His pregnant wife worried about him after leaving their kids to school. These cowards waited for him, and they arrested him only blocks away when there was not that many people. We're gonna fight it. We're gonna fight it legally because without criminal record, he has a right to get out on bond. But I tell you, we gotta fight it here in the streets as well, because we know that dictators don't respect the law. Dictators don't respect the law. ICE is not here to protect us. The federal government didn't come here to protect us or grab criminals. They grab a father. They grab a neighbor. That's who they grab. And we gotta know that the next one will be one of us, because we think differently, because we look different. That's where we gotta stand up here, because our neighbors, our parents, our workers, just like us, and they're being terrorized. But the real criminals, but those who pardoned 1,500 criminals with a convicted record on January 6th. The criminals are in the White House, shutting down. They're shutting down. We are people. We are people. We are people. Si se puede.
I managed to find some time with the alderman as speeches continued in the background.
Yes. Hi, do you have a few moments?
Yes, of course.
Purple's Almanac, an independent podcast.
Okay.
Tell me, you just gave an impassioned speech to the people of Little Village and to your base. What do you have to say to people who are not immigrants, who are maybe in more affluent areas, who maybe don't see ICE raiding these communities? What do you have to say to them?
That I won on any communities and I won on all of us. I think that when immigrant rights are violated, trans rights are being violated, constitutional rights and civil rights are next. So this is a fight for everybody. We need everybody to understand that dictators do not respect the Constitution, dictators don't respect rights, but rights are non-negotiable. And that's why we are asking for a coalition of people against the billionaires, against the corrupt oligarchs, to mobilize, to build a coalition to protect our communities, to protect our city, our neighborhoods, to protect our country from the dictator-in-chief.
And then for those who are supportive of these causes, but they are in communities, suburban, rural communities, far-out communities that don't have, maybe not very multiracial communities, but feel that around them, but they want to support. What do you have to say to them who are more alone?
Support small businesses, don't support corporations. Support small businesses, the communities that that like Little Village, come and shop in Little Village, shop in neighborhoods like us. Don't support the corporations. Put your money, boycott corporations, boycott billionaires. Support your neighbor. Support your neighbor that maybe your coworker, the people that you see putting surviving day in and day out just to put food on your table. That's not your enemy. That's not a criminal. Those are people, families that are being terrorized. And again, our families, our communities need backup. They need solidarity. And again, that can be coming to an event, supporting with your dollars corporations that are criminalizing migrants. It is something that is harming us. So support a small business, but ultimately, again, not only is enough to take into the social media. We need to mobilize. If it's in your community, if it's making phone calls to your community reps or your elected officials, whatever that is, we need action.
Yeah, he's very much in his element, and he's talking directly to his base, but he seems to be playing it well thus far. Can't speak to his actual aldermanic governing, but hey, that's a story for another time. After the stump speeches, and as the light rain turned to sleet, the protest began its march out of the park and west onto 26th Street, directly through the heart of Little Village. Quinceañera boutiques, Virgin Mary statue sellers, barber shops, and family dentists line this street. As the protesters marched through, customer and employee alike came out to voice support. Street vendors for cotton candy, elotes, eggs, and handbags cheered the demonstration, often with product in the other hand. Eventually, after a mile and a half of marching, we reach the corner of 26th and Pulaski just as the sleet turns to snow. One of the leading organizations of today's march is the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, or CARPER. If they sound familiar, that's because they were one of the key organizing groups at last year's DNC. You can get some of those episodes in the Poor Polls Almanac archive. CARPER's parent body, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, released the following letter 2 weeks before Trump's inauguration.
The opening shot in this war against the people is going to be fired at the immigration rights movement, with Trump declaring that on his first day in office, he will proceed to order, command, and force the deportation of millions of immigrants, including entire families. He and the incoming administration have projected that anybody resisting these measures, including elected officials such as mayors and governors, will be arrested or confronted in ways not yet revealed. In particular, the mayor of Chicago has been targeted because Chicago is a sanctuary city and has a declared position that they will not comply with this policy of mass deportation.
So real quick, I wanted to just share this with you guys and so I shared it in the Zoom chat. Here's a picture I took. Yeah, okay. So I took this picture and it is of a little girl. Maybe she just entered high school. I'm guesstimating. It was very quick. And she's holding up a sign that reads, "My parents fought for my future. Now I will fight for theirs." And there's like 6 police vehicles behind them. Nothing crazy with those police vehicles. It's just them following the protest and making sure it's orderly. But just being there on the ground and seeing, like, being in the heart of it. Like this is Chicago, the boogeyman of every conservative talk show radio host, right? And we are in Little Village. Everyone's speaking Spanish, and this is it. This is like ground zero for it. And then like seeing her and seeing all these people on the ground, it does something to you. I don't know, Andy, the demographics of our listening, of our audience here, but I do wonder how much of them have actually been to a demonstration or really interact with much of their local Hispanic communities. I know I haven't that much, truly. And, getting into this story, it really kind of seeped me in that world and in those communities for just a brief second. And even then it was like emotionally, it was a lot. There's a lot, because for a lot of these people like her, and even in those 50 young people in Bolingbrook, I should mention that those 50 people in Bolingbrook, the reason why they're all young is because all of their family members who are adults, they're the ones who are undocumented, and they're the ones that they're just afraid to show their face. I don't know.
It's a cool picture.
It is a very cool picture.
It is very cool. It is depressing. I feel proud of it. So it is cool, but Jesus Christ, this little girl.
The spacing on the sign is a little funny. Because now it says...
Okay, she's like 10.
No, it's just now I will fight for the IRS.
Hell yeah.
You're absolutely, yo.
Bring back the IRS.
Divorcing ourselves from the tragedy of the situation, that is actually really funny. It does say we'll fight for the IRS.
Yeah.
Hey, this girl's a real one, though. She's a real one. As the march reached 26th and Pulaski, the sleet turned to snowfall, and final speeches were made in the middle of the intersection. After the crowd dispersed, with many activists leaving in rented school buses for their respective neighborhoods, I caught up with Carper's representative, Omar Flores, as he was packing up. So we're here on the corner of 26th and Pulaski. Now that this, rally of support with several hundred people has subsided for now, what do people do in between rallies, in between protests? What do they do with ICE among them?
So what we're doing is exactly the things that make people like Tom Homan mad. He had specifically talked about how, Chicago has been really good at getting people to, get ICE to fuck off. And, we're pretty proud of that, so we're going to continue that work. And so some of that means, know your rights trainings, and that also means a rapid response team. So that way, when they start trying to arrest people and trying to do the whole collateral thing that they're talking about, that, even if people that they weren't looking for in the vicinity, they could arrest them and deport them too. We're going to let people know in advance, that, hey, ICE is coming, get in your homes, here are your rights. And, that's been successful for us so far. The Trump administration's not going to be able to come in here without a fight from us.
Yeah, for sure. And just very quickly, I know there's whole seminars dedicated to this, but if ICE comes up to you and asks you, who you are or where anybody else is, what are the steps to take?
So, what I always recommend to people is that they take some of these cards right here, and that, they have the rights cards, and so what you tell them is that you do not wish to speak to them, and then especially if you're in your home, they do not have a right to go in there without a judicial warrant. They might try to present you an administrative one. You have to know what a judicial one looks like. You are in your right to not have to explain anything to them, especially if you're in your own home.
I decided to look into those migrant rights from a concerted expert, who you'll hear from in part 3 of this series. But for now, we'll go to a sit-down interview with Omar from a couple weeks after the march. For the Poor Proles Almanac, I'm Dominic Guanzon, and I'm joined by Omar Flores of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, or CAARPR. Specifically, it's Immigrant Rights Working Committee. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, yeah.
It's like 2 sentences as a name.
Yeah, pretty much. Tell us a little about yourself. What's your background and where you're from?
Yeah, so I grew up in Kenosha. I spent the last 10 years in Milwaukee and just recently moved to Chicago. I've been organizing for around 10 years. I did start in Kenosha, most of it in Milwaukee, and now I'm organizing here in Chicago.
Wow. So this is your first time living in Chicago, like full on, did you say?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, and is that so? Then you just got right to work on organizing. That's pretty cool, actually. I would not have the confidence to be like, I'm kind of new here. Hey, workers' rights, immigrants' rights. Let's just go for it. That's bold.
Yeah, I always thought that when people would come to Milwaukee from other cities, I'd be like, I don't know how you're just jumping into this right away.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I already knew a few folks over here in Chicago that were able to get me linked in pretty quickly. And, I'm already pretty familiar with the area. I'm doing work in, my dad grew up in Little Village. And,
okay.
And so I literally moved 2 blocks away from where he was living as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty cool.
Okay, there you go. Right back to your roots, I guess.
Yeah.
So just in the past couple of months here, month and a half, how are you doing? What's the feeling on the street since ICE stepped up their activities?
Yeah, there's definitely been like a tone of fear, especially in Little Village, especially along 26. Businesses, I think it was like a 30-40% reduction in, the amount of business that they're getting. And for those that don't know 26, it's a pretty historically like a Chicano, Mexicano kind of area here in Chicago. I think it's like the 2nd or 3rd largest like urban population of Latinos. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty eerie, honestly. And myself, like you said, it just kind of hit the ground running. And so it's been pretty stressful, but it's good stuff that's happening.
it feels like people are waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for something to do. And so it hasn't been too hard to get people on our side, and going out there and take up some of the work.
Yeah. So, I mean, on that note, how does the Chicago Alliance plan to, first of all, how's the best way to like shorthand refer to the CAARPR? Is Chicago Alliance a good way to go?
Chicago Alliance, or some people will say Carper.
Carper. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. So how does Carper plan to resist ICE activities then?
Yeah, so, we're getting involved in a lot of the ways that other folks are, right? For example, like doing rapid response trainings, doing defense work of like the wins that we've already had here in Chicago in terms of keeping immigrants protected, because it is under attack, right? For example, Raymond Lopez, specifically an alderperson, had put forth something to remove our sanctuary city status, and we successfully fought against that. But I would say like where the Chicago Alliance really finds like its sort of niche in the immigrant rights movement is that, we want to be like a visible resistance to what's happening, right? And so a lot of people are doing background works. A lot of people are kind of like, working in the shadows, and that's intentional, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But however, like it's also important to have a visible resistance as well. And, to just use the rally that we were at as an example over on 26th Street, going up 26th Street, you're looking at the businesses. There's hardly anybody in there. The streets are looking pretty dead. On the way back, we had encouraged everyone to, like patronize some of these places on your way back home. And like these places were packed. We had 1,500 people come to the rally and all that. That also, came down and supported small businesses as well. And, people were outside with their phones. People were outside chit-chatting with whoever was at the march. This is like a night and day difference compared to like before we got into the street versus after. I think that this visible resistance, it has people feeling more bold, and feeling like, together we're safe. That's kind of like a thing that you learn through organizing, is that, you're a lot safer when you're together. And so that's sort of the strategy that we're looking at here. Yeah, we're going to be, supporting stronger policy changes, in favor of, immigrant rights. We're going to be defending the things that we already have. And we're also going to be working within these rapid response teams. So when ICE does get to somebody, we minimize the damage that happens. But we're also going to be a visible resistance. We're not going to be in the shadows like they want us to be.
Yeah, no, I remember running around the march as it was going steady, and me and a couple of other photographers running around taking pictures. And one of the number one things I noticed was the people coming out of shops and whatever to film on their phones or take pictures. And it was even though it was like a cold day, that was like 30 degrees. And like by the end of it, of course, it went from like light mist to light rain to like full on snowing by the time we were at 26 and Pulaski, I think. So that was actually kind of funny. But no, I think I think a couple people, I think I saw even a couple people like join in like kind of spontaneously too. So yeah, visible presence on the street. That's definitely one of the most important lanes of attack on in terms of resisting kind of that federal government overreach. For a lot of people who do want to join, people who even here in 2025, even though we're not too far removed from 2020, it honestly feels like yesterday, this is still their first time protesting. For many people, I've noticed where it's like, oh my God, Trump too, it's finally happening. We know that a lot of this, particularly for immigrants, has been happening under Biden, would have happened under Kamala as well. But what are protesters, especially first-time protesters' way to protect themselves? Look, what advice do you have for people who maybe they don't want to be card-carrying members of Carper, but they do want to join in on this? How can they like kind of protect themselves, especially in like the increasing federal security apparatus that's just going to get even more unhinged?
No, I work actually in as a network engineer, and with a lot of that comes like a security type work.
Okay.
And there's something that I always kind of reference from my paid work, which is the sliding scale of security. And the idea is that the safest way to store your information is if it were like in a vault at the bottom of the sea with a code that nobody knows, but you can't access the information then.
Yeah.
And then but then if you want to be really convenient, then it's just like advertising everything that you do as much as you possibly can, and that's not safe either. And so what I always tell people is to kind of take it at like your own level of risk as to like however it applies to your life. For example, like I helped organize the March on the RNC in 2024 over in Milwaukee, and there was a lot of concerns about security, about who could be out and about who would be high risk. Some of the folks that were high risk were, for example, like, people with that were formerly incarcerated, people with records, things like that. Obviously undocumented people. We told them take it at your own risk. Here are these other ways that you could get involved. But if, you don't feel safe marching, just let us know. And so really, like, I recommend that like people sort of like take it from where they're at. I don't buy into like the very strict security culture that some people push, where, it's like, put rocks in your shoes so you don't have the same gait, and cover your face completely, wear clothes, burn them after. And it's like, unless you're like killing somebody, I don't think any of that is necessary.
Yeah, which I don't think either of us condone. I think we can safely say that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's like, I recommend that people just get their feet wet, and a lot of these protests, we're really good at keeping people safe. I'm one of the folks that tends to train and lead marshals here in Chicago.
Like protest marshals?
Yeah, protest marshals. Yeah. And, it's taken a lot from my experience from marching on the DNC, marching on the RNC, through, and then, all of the other marches through 2020. And so, you're generally pretty safe with us. If it's a high risk event, we generally just aren't going to be inviting everyone, right? If like we expect there to be arrest, it's going to be with people that generally anticipate that. For undocumented folks, believe it or not, there's a lot of them that are still organizing. A lot of people that are still relatively high risk that, see a need to not only protect themselves, but to protect others. And for example, I'm also in Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And, we had faced FBI raids back in 2011, on trumped up charges saying that we were supporting terrorist organizations,
Wow.
And, one of the strategies that they could have used is to stay quiet and, put their head down exactly like the feds wanted them to. They took the opposite approach. They united with everyone they possibly could. They did a ton of incredible defense work. And ultimately, no charges were ever able to be filed because it was just nothing that they could prove. And, that story has continued over and over. I think of the story of the Tampa Five with the Students for a Democratic Society. These were 5 students that were accused of felonies, of attacking a police officer. And, those charges all got dropped. For all 5 of them. I mean, they were facing like 10, 15 years in prison, for something that they didn't do. And again, they could have stayed quiet, and they even could have took a plea deal where they would have sent an apology to the officer saying that they did wrong and they won't do it again. And they refused that, and they still won't. A lot of it seems high risk from a distance. A lot of it seems really scary from a distance. But I promise you, like once that you're here, it's people are going to tell you how to keep safe, and we're also going to keep you safe. We have each other's back, and historically, that's always been the West.
Yeah, it's level of comfort. It's honestly though kind of refreshing to hear that even for undocumented people, it's they're still out there in some way. Maybe not the literal street, but organizing. That's actually really good to hear, because that was honestly my follow-up question. Is that if you are an undocumented person, would you recommend that maybe that they be out on the street? Or I guess it's a personal decision, of course. But what are ways that people can get involved? Obviously with Carper, but especially for other varying levels of, I guess, involvement. Like let's say if they're undocumented, or say if they are, let's say if they're from the suburbs and maybe not used to the city. What would be your general? Just speaking generically here, but like general recommendation on how they can help?
It's so hard for me to say that just because there are undocumented folks that will even do I'm not even going to say which positions because I feel like that could be a problem, very visible positions.
Wow.
And, I applaud that. I think that's great. And so far, we have not had any bad incidents with that. And of course, we're not naive. We're not going to assume it's going to be okay. We're going to take all necessary precautions to keep people safe. But ultimately, I have a hard time saying people should be in one spot versus another based on their status. I think, like you said, it's a personal decision. And I couldn't personally, let's say somebody really wanted to get out there and be like a press person and they're undocumented, and they just really want to take up the fight in the way that they want to. I would have a really hard time recommending to somebody that they shouldn't.
Wow.
Unless it was super high risk, it was almost guaranteed that they were going to be arrested and there's a history of that, I would not feel comfortable telling people what they could or couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, there's a lot of ways to be involved with the struggle. A lot of people sometimes when they see rallies, they almost see it like they would see in a movie. that like it's a heroic type of thing. Suddenly everyone came out of their houses and gathered in one place, and we were all in the
Do you
street
hear
now.
the people sing? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. People genuinely think that's how it is. And honestly, my first rally that I organized was back in 2014 when I was, I was organizing a solidarity march for Ferguson.
Mm.
It was in Kenosha, which, I know it has a name now, but back then, nobody was looking at Kenosha, a very small town, with mostly white folks. And, I came in very naive. Like a lot of people don't know how this stuff works and what goes into it. And I was definitely one of them. And so, I would say like 90% of what we do is background work, is getting things prepared for people to be able to take on this type of thing. And so, let's say somebody just joined, there's plenty of opportunities to do like outreach, for example. That could include calling up your own friends and family to come out to a march, calling people on our calling list, texting people on our calling list, creating flyers for the event that we're going to be having, contacting media. That's all behind the scenes work that like people don't generally see. You could also take more of like a logistics position, trying to think of like, okay, like we're forming a rally, what people do we need and what supplies do we need, that type of thing. Or even just a simple like volunteer position, maybe you want to make sure people are like well fed and hydrated throughout the march. We definitely take people like that as well. There's also, you could be a marshal. You saw, well, I would say plenty of them, but unfortunately we were a little bit short. We weren't expecting the march to be so big. And so
that's a good problem, I would think. Yeah.
Very, very good problem. Yeah. And so we're not going to be caught flat footed next time. But you did see marshals, that's like it's 99% of the time you're just walking along with a march. It's a pretty easy form of participation. It's a very important job. And, when you need them, you really need them. But to put it in short, there's a million different ways to get involved. It's just like outside of like the security culture stuff, it's just like planning a party. Outside of like, the political tones and, how the different goals and all that. A good rule of thumb for security is, anything that you wouldn't talk about regarding like a birthday party, like, you don't talk about publicly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's lots of different forms of involvement. And if anybody feels like, they don't have the skills or, they don't have the expertise or, they might drag people down, that's never the case. We're always willing to work with folks and get them up to speed. None of us are born organizers,
Yeah. Is there a degree of like acceptability of you're going to get your picture taken, right? Is that safe to say? Because I struggled with this back in 2020 when I was photographing people on protests, and it's like, should I like blur their faces and blur their like tattoos and stuff? But I feel like it's kind of on them, right? To protect So if you're going to, is it safe to say if you're going to a public protest, a march, very visible, the whole point of it is to be visible, you should expect to get unless you're covering up, you should expect to get your picture taken every which way?
Yeah, most definitely. If it's not going to be media people or even like other organizers, it's definitely going to be the police. Just the other day we were at a Palestine protest and this cop, he has this like one of those like old tripods. He's like holding it up with like a video camera, just videotaping like everyone's face. So if you're worried about that, definitely cover your face. But otherwise, fully expect to definitely have people taking pictures. And like you said, it's meant to be a visible protest. Our assumption as organizers is that people go in knowing that risk.
Yeah. I saw like full on police media teams at the DNC protests. They were just full on like, oh dang, you got your own camera crews. That makes sense. That makes sense that they have that. I can't even blame them for it. That's kind of smart on their part. So if you've been watching the news on the recent ICE Operation Safeguard is the name of the hell of a name, Operation Safeguard on this latest ICE operation. How do you think journalists and reporters have been covering these events? I think we can dismiss the more conservative side of things because they're going to do what they're going to do, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of the quote unquote middle ground, the center, and even more on the more progressive side, how do you think they've been covering the protests and the raids?
Honestly, in terms of the raids, we haven't had all that much happening in Chicago strictly. Mm-hmm. And you'll even see this from people like Tom Homan and Trump himself that are saying that they have great frustrations with not being able to carry out raids the way that they would like to here in Chicago. That's something we're really proud of. And so it's like, I see generally two things in the media. One of them is almost like a hyper sensationalizing over like what's going on, you know? I think it's good for us to be proactive and to be like, you know, concerned about what's happening. But like ultimately, like at this point in time, like nothing super different is happening from the previous administration. There's a much worse tone around it, and I'm sure it's going to get worse. I mean, I think I would say one thing that's definitely novel is the other day, you know, a father being arrested as he was dropping his kid off at school. You know, I mean, that was the first time that that's happened since the new administration. But like, you know, ultimately, yeah. And then I feel like there's also like the other side of it where it almost like downplays like what's happening a little bit too much. I think what really irritates me sometimes about like the arguments that I see in media is just like people get like very like technical about like human lives. You know, like oh, you know, they're criminals and this and that, and oh, you know, it's like there's no like actual like question of like even if they're not willing to look at it from like a humane perspective, maybe look at it from a practical perspective, and like legitimately nothing that we're doing around this whole situation is practical, and I feel like that's not really a narrative that we're seeing a lot of.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I would like to see a little bit more of like, you know, like what's like because I feel like the practical outlook, like it lends itself to like my politics, you know, like if we generally like look at it that way. And, you know, I feel like I can't blame media for this, but there also hasn't been much coverage of like, you know, like what people are doing to resist Trump, specifically like in the immigrant rights movement. And a part of that is because, you know, a lot of people aren't willing to talk to media given the sensitivity of these rapid response teams,
Yeah.
of some of these ICE watch teams and all that, like I could see where people wouldn't want that out there. But generally, I mean, I'm pretty agnostic to like what's getting out there, just because like if I'm being real, I feel like I live in my like little organizer bubble, which is it sometimes feels a bit more real than like what is like put out there, because like you know we're actually like talking with people,
Yeah.
you know, like this isn't like a accumulation of what people are saying.
Yeah, no, people, including people like me, is like, yeah, I'm just kind of talking about it. You're actually talking to the actual story, which is the people who are in danger here. But no, actually, I'm actually really glad to hear, because I had read reports that Homan and Trump were frustrated, but you know, it could just be them being them, especially Trump. But that's actually good to hear that for now we seem to be in a more calm before maybe even a bigger storm. So round 2 or 3 or whatever. It's a never-ending fight until we get proper, full, comprehensive immigration reform. But it's that's good to hear for now. But I guess be on guard is the saying. So
I keep telling people, you know, like with us being able to successfully, you know, tell them to fuck off, and they are fucking off. You know, that there's going to be a rebound effect of that. You know, they're not going to take that lying down the same way that, you know, if they got rid of a sanctuary city here, like we wouldn't take that lying down either. And so,
yeah.
You know, they're gonna fight back, and so, like you said, just caution and be careful.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier in that response that some Latinos may have been not quite gelling with the large influx of Venezuelans being housed and trying to find housing for them. It's so easy, especially for someone who's not Hispanic or Latino, to talk about Hispanics and Latino as just this big monolith. But from your point of view, how has the confluence of all these different cultures and all of these different ethnicities and nationalities within that Hispanic and Latino banner, how has that been in the face of ICE, or at least the threat of ICE in the past month?
It's been more unified than it's ever been, honestly. I'm sure it is, as it is with any diaspora. Like there's lots of like little petty infighting within like general, you know, areas or groups of people. But like, I mean, I've seen that largely go out the window. More recently, I mean, I haven't like, you know, seen any like Mexicans come out and just say like, you know, legalization for all except Venezuelans, you know, like, no, it's just like a legalization for all, you know, like defend everyone that, you know, is an immigrant. And so generally we've seen pretty good unity, I guess is what I would say, especially compared with before.
Nothing better than for all of us to go and say, F this guy. Nothing better than to unite everyone. So 6 months ago, I was talking to Fiani from Chicago Alliance about Palestine during the DNC, and seeing you all on the streets then and now really informed me about just how deep the left can go when it comes to like mass movement, actual on the ground politics, and not people talking on Reddit or people talking on NBC, etc. Between then and now, right? The DNC to now we are in a solid Trump 2 administration. How do you think just the whole breadth of the left is handling that shift from the, oh my God, Kamala's actually not going to win this election when it would seem like a shoo-in? How do you think it's handled that? And for me, because the left is like has a million different definitions, I could say everyone that's more like someone who's a Democrat, card-carrying Democratic Party member who's like, oh yeah, I guess the gays, they can get some rights, to like someone more like Carper. How do you think they're all handling it between then and now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so we hosted a protest at Harper, for example, like the day after the election. That was something that I had really wanted to push for. Because in my head, I remember when Trump first got elected back in 2016, I mean, the response was immense. I had some more veteran comrades kind of talk with me and be like, it's going to be a little bit different this time around. I think that people are going to be feeling demoralized and rather than like amped up and ready to fight back. And ultimately they were right. I mean, we had bigger numbers than anywhere in the country, but like it was still just like 500-600 people there, maybe compared to the thousands that we had before. And so, I think that, okay, so if we're like looking at Democrats, I think like what really burned them is the same arrogance that like lost them in 2016. And, it's just like, I wish I could have just said or done something to really get through to their heads, but it's literally repeating mistakes. I think that they assumed that they had it in the bag and they could just, ignore Palestine. They could just ignore, the healthcare issues. They could just ignore all these very basic things that people have been asking for and still win. And like, our line as people that, were in the march on the DNC is that, the Democrats cannot win if they support genocide. And, I think ultimately, unfortunately, we were right. And so, you have a lot of people that are feeling demoralized, feeling like they can't do anything about it, feeling like they gave it their best shot and really like they haven't done anything yet. On the other hand, if I had to like maybe express a grievance with like some of like the more left-wing type folks is that there's this tendency to only work with other left-wing folks. I'm not going to say which organizations, but I will say that I went to a protest over in DC on Inauguration Day. Mm-hmm. And it was not very well attended. It was like maybe 1,000 people at max.
Yeah.
And honestly, like I'm trying to think of a polite way to put this, but it was just like a leftist talking to other leftists is how I can put it politely. And, it was hardly any mention of Trump. There was hardly any mention of like the politics that, like that people are like really upset about, like reproductive justice or immigrant rights. I mean, there was maybe one or two immigrant rights speakers. Compared to, the protests that we hosted here in Milwaukee. I'm sorry, here in Milwaukee. I'm so used to saying that still here in Chicago.
Yeah.
We had almost double that. Something that wasn't a national mobilization. And it's because, we focused on mass politics. We focused on immigrant rights. We focused on Palestine. We focused on the things that, people are actually talking about. And so like, I know, left unity, broadly speaking, is important, and we shouldn't be sectarian and all those types of things or whatever. But also it's like, who's even talking to like just everyday average people? And I would say like, that's like the biggest blind spot, like all across the board from like your most average Democrats or like people way on the left. Nobody is actually like willing to like put in the work and like actually work with people. I mean, this is like I was telling you before, I mean, you just ask people to do something and they do it. I mean, people are looking for something to do. I feel like I mentioned this in almost every interview, but like, I always think of a quote from a movie, Sorry to Bother You. This guy, he tells another guy, he says,
yes, is that Lakeith Stanfield? Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, he uses his white voice because he's a black guy and he's on the phone.
Voice, yeah, and they turn to horses and yeah. And he's like, yeah, they all this company, they're turning people into horses to create efficient workers. It's like this really crazy sci-fi thing, and he gets on the TV and he's telling people, call your senators, like do something about this, like we got to do something now. And ultimately nobody cares, like nobody gave a shit. He's asking his friend, like, why does nobody care? He's like, well, everyone knew like what you said, it's what they've heard a million times before. It's kind of bullshit. If like people aren't given real solutions to an issue, they learn to live with it. And like ultimately, I think that's what like the Democrats have been doing. It's not giving real solutions to real issues. And same with a lot of people on the left. And I think we're seeing almost like a doubling down on that behavior is that like people just aren't willing to like actually do the groundwork. With that said, though, I think people are ready. Generally speaking, people outside of organizing circles, people outside of the Democrats As an organizer, I'm almost happy nobody else has realized that, because then, we're able to get a bunch of people to, a process that we know works. And so, the recruitment has been great for us just because we're willing to take it.
Yeah. I don't really have much to say other than that. I did see an anti-Elon poster at the immigrant right protest that we attended, and I'm like, you know what? I think there's finally some room for some intersectionality here, and I think at the very least, in some ways we have lucked out with this administration. I'm very sorry to get into like national politics and all that stuff, but it's all coming together, and at the very least, I'm very glad that at least there is a few organizations out there on the streets actually keeping in tabs with their respective lane, their respective concern. And so, Omar, did you have anything else that maybe you wanted to talk about or
No,
mention?
I feel like I've already yapped too much. Thank you, though.
Omar Flores of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, or CARPER, which I love that, so I will use that from now on. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. On March 5th, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson testified before Congress on sanctuary cities, along with the mayors of New York, Boston, and Denver. Among Chicago's politically inclined, there was much interest in Mayor Johnson's first high-profile national outing.
Obviously, people could have their issues with Mayor Johnson, as they would with any politician in the U.S., but, I think in the front of defending immigrant rights, I don't think he's really shown himself to be an enemy. He was a staunch supporter of making sure that immigrants were able to get over here, and, even just to have places to stay, even though some of them, not the best, much more than what some other cities are willing to do. And additionally, that we were able to back off, the attempts to get rid of our sanctuary city status. I thought that was I think that's pretty good. And, the fact that he's willing to go over there and testify on behalf of our city, I think back to the politics in Wisconsin, the way that some of those people approach things, just no backbone whatsoever. It's just what you typically think of when you think of a Democrat. Just like people that are just willing to let anything happen as long as it's politically expedient for them. I haven't really seen that so much with Mayor Johnson. There was a point where he really could have threw immigrants under the bus. The media was coming at him. Even some left-wing media was criticizing him, for the Venezuelans coming here. He still allowed them to come over here, give him asylum.
He's facing a lot of headwinds here in the Windy City as he struggles to implement his more left-leaning reforms and investments while balancing the gargantuan task of Chicago's day-to-day governance. In layman terms, some well-earned L's with sparse dubs. Still, the hearing was a chance to defend those policies in front of the cameras.
Record number of businesses fleeing the city of Chicago. You couple that with record deficits. $2 billion deficit line of credit that you just had to take out this week. But you've spent $300 million of taxpayer money on illegal immigrants. And when I think about all of those things and I look at the strategy you continue to take, you're putting the interest of illegal immigrants above the interest of taxpayers in Chicago. But you continue to go down this path, and for the life of me, I can't understand it. So, Mayor, tell me why you continue to put the interests of illegal immigrants above taxpayers in Chicago.
Thank you for your representation. Violent crime is down in Chicago.
Well, let me reclaim my time. So I have a statistic here. Last year, Chicago had 573 murders.
Down.
Okay, but I want to compare that to the city of New York that is almost two-thirds the size of Chicago, 337 murders. So you had 573 murders in the city of Chicago, and you're one-third the size.
That's the lowest amount in 5 years under my leadership.
Okay, and you look at the level of violent criminals, sexual offenses, and drug dealers.
All violent crime is down in Chicago. In fact, just this year alone, Congressman, respectfully, there's a 20% decrease in violent crime in the city of Chicago.
I don't agree with your statistics.
Well, it's not a matter of whether or not you agree with it. It's a matter of whether it's a fact.
Let me reclaim my time, because I thought you might do this. And when I hear your answer, no one in this room should be surprised that your approval rating is 6.6%. Now, that's not just me saying this. Newsweek article, the least popular politician in America is Brandon Johnson. So recent poll, M3 Strategies conducted this February 20th to 21st, showed that Mayor Johnson has a 6.6% approval rating, the worst showing of any political figure in the country's history. So I know you're talking about crime is down and things are great and, the city's flush with money. None of that is backed up by the people in the city of Chicago. And so I'm wondering why you continue to go down this path of failed policies, destruction to the city of Chicago, people fleeing, law enforcement at an all-time low. And I'm wondering if you have any remorse for that here today and can tell us why you continue to double down on these failed policies.
We've invested $1.25 billion for housing and economic development, particularly for Black Chicago. It's the largest investment in the history of Chicago. 45% increase in youth employment, particularly for Black and brown children. I will not apologize for my investments in the people of Chicago. We have one of the most diverse economies, the top universities. As violence continues to go down and investments continue to go up, that is what's most important. We've opened up 3 mental health clinics, the first mayor since the first Black mayor in the history of Chicago.
I'm going to reclaim my
invest in
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to reclaim my time.
In public health, and I will continue to make those investments.
Your approval rating speaks volumes.
Well, the people approve of my investments, and I will continue to make those investments.
You're going the wrong
much.
direction. You need to reverse your policies on sanctuary cities. That's what the election results were last year. Crime and immigration were the #1 issue in the election from Republicans, Democrats.
Chairman, the gentleman's time.
We could use your help to actually help us continue to invest in these programs that continue to drive violence down in the city of Chicago. And I'm willing to work with you, and I'm glad I had a chance to finally meet you for the first time.
Gentleman's time's expired.
In case you got lost in the bluster, and it's very easy to do, the Republican congressman is lambasting Mayor Johnson for apparently prioritizing dangerous illegals over his own citizens who are suffering from an out-of-control crime spree and poor credit ratings. Let's set aside the fact crime is indeed down and has been going down since the COVID thaw of 2021, because that's literally the trend everywhere, according to any source anywhere that isn't intentionally framing Chicago as Mad Max. Let's set aside the fact that the Johnson administration actually didn't do that great of a job taking care of migrants with its administrative fumbling, trying to get winterized tents up in time for the cold. And let's set aside the fact that crime only stays down when you invest in people and their communities. The hell does sanctuary mean anyway? There is currently no official designation of sanctuary status for states and cities. Sanctuary is a layman term for any legislation that prevents local officials from cooperating with federal officials. Berkeley, California became the first municipality in the United States with legislation considered sanctuary laws. In an article from East Bay Express,
Berkeley passed the very first sanctuary resolution on November 8, 1971, in order to protect U.S. Navy sailors resisting the Vietnam War. The philosophy behind this initiative, which forbade city employees from assisting in the enforcement of a federal law, not only inspired later generations of the sanctuary movement, but the actual language also was later borrowed by policymakers seeking to offer legal protections to refugees and immigrants.
Over time, with the draft for now no longer being an issue, sanctuary became synonymous with immigration. According to the Federation for American Immigration Reform, Illinois is one of 11 sanctuary states, designated as such because they,
through executive action or passage of law, restrict most forms of cooperation with federal immigration authorities.
Restricting cooperation means states are not compelled by federal law to assist ICE and any other federal immigration enforcement. Conversely, and this is very important, local governments can't prohibit the feds from doing their work, which would be a violation of the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, where the Fed gets the final say unless the Supreme Court passes a ruling. Many times, local municipalities can go further than what their states say. For example, in Colorado and New Mexico, all county jails do not honor ICE detainers. ICE detainers are written requests from ICE asking local law enforcement to detain someone for an additional 48 hours after their release. Those additional 48 hours are specifically so ICE agents have extra time to decide whether to take the individual into federal custody for removal purposes. New Mexico reaffirmed this in February of this year. Conversely, states can clamp down on their cities and counties. In 2018, Iowa passed a law taking away state funding to any city that passed immigrant-specific sanctuary laws, effectively banning them. This appeared to be taking a page out of Texas's playbook, which did the same thing the year before, and Florida followed suit the year after. However, I should mention that Iowa still has Second Amendment sanctuary counties, which is the same framework as migrant sanctuary, but instead of protecting people, it's protecting guns. So congratulations to Des Moines County on becoming Iowa's 35th Second Amendment sanctuary county as of 2022. They can't take your guns, which, hey, based, but they can take your neighbors, which honestly cringe.
Well said.
Back to Chicago. For 40 years, the city has had what it calls a welcoming city ordinance, meaning the city does not ask for citizenship status and does not use citizenship as a reason to deny city services. Additionally, the Chicago Police Department is not allowed to provide ICE with support. There are reasons beyond empathy for why states and cities do this. First, and probably foremost, it puts less strain on the city to cooperate with and detain undocumented migrants for ICE. This is reflected in the Chicago Municipal Code.
The City Council finds that the cooperation of all persons, both documented citizens and those without documentation status, is essential to achieve the city's goals of protecting life and property, preventing crime, and resolving problems.
Another reason is so undocumented migrants can feel comfortable cooperating with police, again reflected in the Municipal Code.
The cooperation of the city's immigrant communities is essential to prevent and solve crimes and maintain public order, safety, and the security in the entire city.
Mayor Johnson, in his congressional hearing, summarizes this point of view.
As a welcoming city space, it's important that the trust between the community and law enforcement is strong. That's ultimately how we have built a safer city. Just this year alone, violent crime is down 20%. Any type of threat to the civility and to the humanity of people is a threat to the evolution of our democracy. And so it's incumbent upon Washington to ensure that we are funding our education system, that we are funding our transportation system, our healthcare system, creating more jobs. Just since I've been in office, we've increased youth employment, summer jobs by over 40%. Making sure that our young people see their purpose is the value of this democracy. And so I call on this body to continue to invest in the city of Chicago that sends billions of dollars to Washington.
Okay, so for the record, I did listen and watch all 5.5 hours of that congressional hearing. But the funny thing about it, it's typical congressional hearing stuff. It's just playing for the media clips, playing for political points. If the people on the stand are on your side, then you're just buttering them up. If they're not on your side, you're just hammering them down, et cetera, et cetera. That's just how it goes in congressional hearings. The funniest thing, though, is that the hearing, it was the mayors of Boston, Denver, in Chicago and New York, Eric Adams, who is embroiled in a whole other issue right now. So it was both Democrats and Republicans just shitting all over Mayor Eric Adams because he is a piece of shit. Nice. And it's really, really fucking funny because it's a whole unrelated lawsuit of oh, did Trump give him clemency in exchange for political favors, literal fucking bribery? I don't know if you've heard about this. So, yes. so out of nowhere, they'll be a Democrat will be talking about immigration. It's hey, thank you, Mayor Brandon Johnson. I really appreciate it that you've come over here and talking about how our community is better served with our local community members, rather or not they're undocumented. Mayor Eric Adams, so you took this favor from Trump. Can you confirm? And it's just immediate pivot to Eric Adams getting shit on. And no lifeline whatsoever from the Republicans because he's still the mayor of New York. And it was just really, really fucking funny.
Love it. Love that for us. Silver linings.
Man.
Yeah. So the mayors spent hours taking their licks, with the big media spin afterwards working its magic. Overall, it was a big publicity trap set by the Republican-controlled Congress, but the mayors held their own for the most part. While Mayors Johnson and Eric Adams were more passive, the latter trying to avoid incriminating himself, Mayors Mike Johnston of Denver and Michelle Wu of Boston were a little more active.
Do you believe if people come here and break the law, that they should be escorted out, or do you believe they just get to stay here forever?
Our immigration system is broken. We have not had comprehensive immigration reform since 1986.
May I answer fully?
Yeah, his time's expired, but
Okay.
feel free to answer.
Yes, I do believe we need, cities everywhere clearly need an immigration law that has secure borders, comprehensive and consistent, compassionate pathways to residency and citizenship, resources to adjudicate the complexities of the law, and at the same time, I do not support mass deportation. That would be devastating for our economy, and there are millions of people who are running our small businesses, going to our schools.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
And that's part 2 of our 3-part series on the winter 2025 Chicagoland ice raids. Join us next time as we talk to a migrants' rights expert on the constitutional protections that are still provided to some of America's most vulnerable, and how it may prove useful to everyone. Make sure to follow Poor Proles Almanac on all socials and spread the word. Andy has a Substack with great supplemental materials on the show's regular content, usually trees and stuff. And you can follow me on Instagram at Blue Collar Jazz and Blue Sky at Domguan. Matt, do you have any closing thoughts that I didn't just pull from earlier in the episode because I'm actually recording this in post?
Now I will fight for the IRS.
Well said.